Hey everybody, welcome to another Rackspace Office Hours Hangout. I am Alan Bush and I'm broadcasting live from the castle, Rackspace's headquarters here in San Antonio, Texas. Normally sitting beside me would be Drew Cox. Drew's out today right now, but we have a great guest with us today, Justin Phelps, one of our DevOps engineers.
Hello, how's it going?
Hey, it's great to have you on here, Justin. Really glad to have you on. I know you've been, you've seen the show a couple of times before, and you've been a longtime Racker and someone that I've, personally looked up to, and it's really great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you.
One of the reasons that we wanted to have you on the show is a big congratulations to you being named the first ever, co-first ever Ansible Certified Engineer. Right?
Yeah.
So you and another DevOps engineer.
Paul Dervaj, who shares the honor with me, I suppose, and great guy.
Yeah, so it's great. Ansible is a configuration management engine, really, and it's a tool that people can use to really quickly set up infrastructure. We'll get into that a little bit more here in a minute, but you were actually named the first certified engineer. I think that's really cool. It's a really great honor for you and for Rackspace as well. So we're really glad to be able to honor you and have you on and share that. And we've got a couple other things planned that I want to talk about here in a little bit, but let's real quick mention that anybody that's watching live, you can ask us a question if you have any. You can join in on the conversation a couple of different ways. So if you're watching on Crowdcast, there's a little question box down there. Just drop in your question, and we're more than happy to answer that question for you live on the air. If you're thinking about Ansible, anything like that, any questions about configuration management, we're happy to get them answered for you. You can also use our Twitter handles and just drop us a line that way, and it's available for you there. But Justin, real quick, let's have you introduce yourself. And so, how long have you been a Racker?
I started at Rackspace on Halloween in 2011, so it's going on 4 years this October.
Nice.
Yeah, started in Managed Cloud, which is now Managed Operations.
Right.
Under a guy named Ryan Walker. So
yes, absolutely. One of the he's been a guest a couple of times as well on the show, and just a really sharp guy. That's great. So we've got so you've been here for about 4 years now, and now you're a DevOps engineer. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
So it means that whenever I support customers, I do it in a DevOps-y fashion. Which, the joke is, if you ask, 5 DevOps engineers what they do or what DevOps is, you're going to get like 8 different answers, right?
Yeah.
So it's really about knowing, CI/CD processes, automation, things like that, kind of understanding what configuration management means, pets versus cattle, all the appropriate buzzwords that I can drop for you here.
Right. Exactly. And you've been doing that for about a year now, right?
Yeah, roundabout, yeah.
And you helped out a lot of our what we would call our before we went into this DevOps arena. I think you were helping a lot of the customers that were doing things a little bit more cloud savvy, and I had some of the larger, bigger deployments, and we're helping those customers as well, right?
Yeah, so that was part of the marquee effort that eventually morphed into what is our DevOps offering today. And then along the way, I've done work with our heat orchestration templates, which are great, and you should absolutely use them if you want to stamp out configurations. And then it's a lot of work with Ansible along like an Ansible, just working with customers, consulting, things like that.
Yeah, great. So let's talk about Ansible, right? Let's talk about some of the about really what it is. So I mean, it really helps with configuration, right? So it's a simple client. I mean, what I like about it is you don't have to install it across all of the nodes that you're going to be using, right? It just uses SSH to send that configuration.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're looking at something like Chef or Puppet or SaltStack, you typically have an agent that you're running on the other nodes, and for some people they don't really care for that. So Ansible is a great option if you already have SSH access. You just want to write some playbooks on your local machine and then run them against that infrastructure and maintain that consistent configuration.
Yep. Speaking of SaltStack, you are also a Salt Certified Engineer.
Absolutely.
So you're just racking up the configuration manament certifications there.
Yeah.
So
I'm not number 1 on that. I'm only number 37. But but you can't win them all.
You can't. No, that's good. We've got quite a few. We had the first Salt Certified Engineer as well. So
Yeah.
that's it's really cool that we have so many people that are out there at the forefront of that. Great. So what are some of the ways that Ansible, that our customers are using Ansible?
So if you happen to deploy anything like a LAMP server anywhere in our managed operations, Ansible is actually behind the scenes doing that setup and configuration. So that's all triggered with the heat template and all that good stuff. Customers use it to, again, maintain consistent architectures. And there's also some neat things going on under Matt Martz, where Rackers are using it to actually do automated tasks across a bunch of boxes as well.
Yeah, I think it's nice because it's such a nice and lightweight client that you don't really have to invest in a lot of overhead, to run the actual implementation itself. I mean, I guess they have Ansible Tower, right, which kind of gives you a GUI and lets you kind of manage it from a single place. But I mean, you can spin something up and just have it on your local machine.
Yeah, so like, community edition of Ansible is perfect for, like a small group of people or one sysadmin who wants to, manage his infrastructure or a few things. And Tower really comes into play whenever you have like a complex organization that has different teams and groups that need different permissions to different sets of infrastructure. So Tower comes into play whenever you need that complexity.
Great. And you mentioned the LAMP stack. So that's our cloud orchestration, right?
Yep.
Which uses heat templates, right?
Yep.
But also is using Ansible. So tell us about how those two kind of work together.
Yeah, so with any server that you spin up, you can feed it cloud init data, which is just a series of instructions of things for it to do once it comes online. And so part of that could be, cloning down a Git repository that contains, salt states or Ansible playbooks, and then running those against that local machine. So that's pretty much how that's used, is so that we rewrite the configuration pieces in Ansible, which is easy, and it also works against multiple OSs and a lot easier than what it would be if you were to write a bunch of bash to do that. And then we just sort of, I think actually it uses the Chef provider today to bootstrap that, but you could do it very easily with bash and cloud init as well.
Great, and I think that's I think that's an interesting way to do it, because instead of having everything live in one way to do it, I think that you're breaking it out into these individual components. So if you want to change one part of the recipe, you don't have to take everything down and reconfigure it. I mean, you just say, hey, let's add in this on the Ansible part of it versus the standing up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Orchestration. Great. And what about what are some of the ways that you've used Ansible? Have you used it outside of helping our customers? Are there any projects you've worked on? I know you did a little bit with Docker. I mean, I imagine that's partly for the customers, but tell us a little bit about Ansible and how you used it.
So I maintain some playbooks and some very simple roles just to kind of do common things. So like make sure that, on the systems that I manage, make sure that my user is on there and make sure it's got a known good authorized keys file. And, these certain, utility packages are installed. And, if I've got something at like a service I'm running, then I use a role or something to make sure that that's in a known good state. So it's just sort of kind of my own private infrastructure kind of,
and I think
consistency tool.
Well, consistency. I think that's it right there. Is you can say, these are the few things that I want to have on every single box that I spin up. My SSH keys, my own user, right? Because you don't want to do everything as your root. That's a really bad idea. So you want to have a user that has some privileges, but is locked down. You can deploy or lock down certain ports and things like that. So, knowing that every single image that you spin up is going to be set up the same way, I think that's really key.
Yeah.
I guess the other way to do that though would be to do images. So would you recommend somebody create a base image, or somebody would use Ansible or some other type of configuration management to get that consistency?
Well, that's kind of there's a pros and cons list there, right? So if you're baking images, then that image very quickly becomes out of date, right? But it also means that if you have a lot of configuration to do, you can bake that image once and save time by deploying from that image. The converse to that is that you may not have the most up-to-date security patches or packages or whatever, but also that may be a good thing if you look at what you want to deploy the same image and have that almost immutable infrastructure piece where you're not deploying, say 15 web nodes, right? And along that line, while you're doing that, Ansible is doing all the configuration, right? And let's say that a new package hits the repositories that same exact moment you're deploying your web app, right? That web server 1 may get one version of Apache, web server 15 may get a different one, and then you've got inconsistency, and you're kind of stuck in that same loop. So it's really a pros and cons list, right? Whether you want a good paradigm to follow might be in dev, use configuration management to get the latest and greatest stuff tested against each other, make sure they all work together, and then bake an image from that and roll that into staging and production, so you know that you're good.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I never thought about doing that. I know that we recommend to a lot of our customers to use a combination of both images and configuration management to stand up environments. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense to get all of those bugs out in dev, and once you're there, just for a stability sake, to push out to prod, especially if you're running a more continuous integration where you're going to have relatively soon push out a new version of production.
Yeah.
But, if you're looking at staying in production for years and years at a time, you might not want to do that. But no, that's really interesting advice. I never thought of it that way. I do want to take a minute. We saw a few more viewers pop up here, so I wanted to just welcome everybody. This is our weekly Rackspace Office Hours Hangout. I'm Alan Bush, along with Justin Phelps, who has recently been certified as a Ansible Certified Engineer. We're talking a little bit about Ansible configuration management, life as a Racker. So if anybody is out there and has a question about Ansible or anything, you can drop us a line through any number of ways. Drop us a comment on YouTube or through the Crowdcast application works as well. We'd be happy to answer those questions for you. So what? Let's see. So we've been talking a little bit about how Ansible works and some of the different ways that our customers are implementing Ansible. But you're also a SALT certified engineer.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the differences between SALT and Ansible, and the kind of the pros and cons about why somebody would want to go Ansible or SALT? Because I don't think that you're going to tell me, there's only one way to go. I think that you probably have a pragmatic approach to that.
It's kind of like the whole Coke versus Pepsi argument, right? Or Emacs versus Vim. It's whatever you're.
I don't know if I go that far. There's one answer on that, but.
Vim.
But, yeah.
But anyway, it's what you're comfortable with, right? So I think one of the things that Ansible really has going for it is its learning curve. It's a very shallow learning curve. It's very easy for sysadmins to understand what Ansible is doing under the covers because they've been SSHing for their entire career, basically. Salt does it differently, and it has you have to understand a lot more components and how they all work together and the complexity around all that. Now, with that added complexity, you get a lot more flexibility, and you also get the integrations and customization that you may be looking for. Something that that you may have to go to Tower for on the Ansible side, you can do natively in Salt without having that paid for service. And so that's kind of like the immediate thing that I always think of whenever somebody asks me that question. Going beyond that, Ansible playbooks and tasks are kind of declarative or imperative. So you say, do this one thing, do this next thing, and do this next thing, and you write it in order, and that's how it happens. And with Salt, it's more of a declarative methodology where you say, I want the server to be in this state based on this, this language that I've laid out. And I don't really care how you get there, just make sure it's in that state.
Yeah. And that's interesting because you can, as you continue to run Salt, the minions, as they're called, the nodes, they'll kind of report back and say, hey, I'm not in this state. Help me get back to that state, right? And that's kind of the...
Kind of. So Salt and Ansible both are very much a push methodology. Okay. So they're not constant. It's like if you think about Chef, Chef clients are constantly checking in. I think the default's every 30 minutes or something like that. With Salt and Ansible, you're very much pushing your configuration out. Now you can set that up on a schedule. There's some things like Ansible pull, or you can cron tab your Salt minion high state. But traditionally it's a push mechanism. Now, one of the things that having a minion does for you though is it allows it's a lot faster. Tom Hatch, who writes Salt, his big thing is speed. He's all about getting it done as fast as possible, and that's why there's an agent. Because the SSH transport has some overhead to it, right. Versus like a pub sub methodology, which I think Salt's still on 0MQ, and then they're doing a rewrite into like their own custom protocol, because that's how they care. They care that much about speed, they're having to write their own, to get the speed they want out of it.
So maybe they should look into a different type of platform that's built for speed.
Right. They're basically writing reliable UDP is how they describe it, which is an oxymoron almost, but
there's a couple of jokes to be made there, I think. Great. So we have a question that I'm going to go ahead and answer. Looks like Vishnu had a question here. First of all, he says congratulations, and I echo that. But then he asks, how will you provision new instances in Ansible? In SaltStack, you can use Salt Cloud for that.
Yep.
So is there a way to provision new instances?
There is. I believe actually Matt Martz, who's also a Racker, wrote the modules for this. And unfortunately, my internet went down. But if you go look at the docs.saltstack, SaltStack, okay, you got me thinking Salt here.
I know.
Docs.ansible.com. There should be a if you go to the Ansible documentation bit. Anyway, there's a module in the documentation. I believe it's prefixed racks, and what that allows you to do is define what your infrastructure looks like in basically a playbook or a task, and then have Ansible reach out once you configure everything properly on that side. Reach out, query the APIs, do things like, hey, do these servers already exist? If they don't, create them. If they do, I'm going to leave it alone. There's some nuances to it. It's just comparing it to Salt Cloud. I think Salt Cloud has that laid out a little better. You can do things in Salt Cloud like your provider and your profiles and all these other things are kind of laid out in separate configuration files instead of throwing it all in one big playbook, which allows you some flexibility. And then the map file itself for Salt Cloud makes it easy to define a very simple list of infrastructure you want to deploy. Versus the playbooks style on Ansible, where it's you have to define a lot of things at once with that. It's definitely doable, and you've got it right there. So there we go.
Yeah. So it looks like it takes great advantage of Pyrax.
Yeah, it does take advantage of Pyrax, and which is another great SDK that I've used a lot. So, but yeah, you can definitely do that, and this is where you'd go to find all the documentation on that.
Great. Yeah, docs.ansible is a invaluable guide.
Absolutely.
I'm sure that you referenced it a lot in preparing for the certification there.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Vishnu, for the question. Anybody else that has a question, drop us a line. Again, we love these questions. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. Yeah, that's great. And so it's, you can deploy new infrastructure as you need as well. The way that I look at this kind of spectrum of configuration management. I mean, you've got something like Ansible that is, like you mentioned, just push out. This is what the configuration needs to be, and then all the way through to like a Chef or a Puppet that's really very robust. But it's at the same time, you mentioned, it's kind of a trade-off where it's more complex, but then that means that you have to do a little bit more coding to build it out, and there's so many more options. So yeah, there's quite the spectrum there of what's possible. So it's nice. That's good. That is good. Great. Yeah, thank you again, Vishnu, for that. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. So let's see. Anything else you want to tell us about Ansible right now that you think would be beneficial to somebody who is considering having some type of a configuration management solution? I think that you mentioned the learning curve is pretty easy. It's pretty forgiving. What are some things that you would recommend to people who are looking to get some fast benefit out of Ansible? What would you recommend that they look at starting with? Yeah,
I mean, get your hands dirty. They have a great quick start guide on their site, and it lets you the introduction sort of walks you through. They have how to set up your inventory file, how to run ad hoc commands, how to run full playbooks, how you write those playbooks. You know, there's a lot of pieces to it, but they're all named, you know, in intelligent, you know, in an intuitive way, I should say. So, you know, variables are variables that feed into your playbooks. Playbooks are a collection of things that you're doing. The things that you're doing are called tasks. You know, your inventory defines what nodes you can run those things against. Yeah, I mean, their quick start video is great, and you know, they have really great documentation. And if you find, like, you know, something you want to do, like say like add a user to Postgres, or add a user to MySQL, or you know, configure an Apache virtual host. The documentation has a module section, and those modules, you know, I just sort of go to the all modules view and do Control F and look on the page for what module I think I might need, and that's what I go for.
Yeah, I know there's a really big, robust ecosystem of modules that you can go with, and you know, you just load up new modules and go.
Another great resource, there's also something called the Ansible Galaxy, which is a kind of, it's almost, think of it like the community cookbooks repository for Chef. It's where a lot of people have gotten together and written some roles for common tasks or common things or roles that a server should have. And you know, they're of varying quality, just like Chef community cookbooks, but they have like a voting system and things like that. And I think if you go to like galaxy.ansible.com, that will take you to the actual Galaxy. So from there you can actually search for what role you might be looking for. Like, so maybe you're looking for I think there's an Explore link at the very, very top.
Yeah, there it is.
And then
nice.
you can do searches and look for the top rated roles, and maybe there's some new ones that have come in. And these usually just link right back to a GitHub repository where somebody's hosting that. So, you know, the whole adage of pull requests are always accepted. So if you don't like the way something's working, you know, work with the guy who wrote it, and maybe y'all can make it better together. And that's whole, like, that's where my passion comes from, is open source and you know, collaboratively making things better as a group.
Yeah, we had your coworker Martin Smith on last week talking about GitHub, and that was a great, really fun show. But what was nice about that is, I mean, that's what we talked about, how there are so many different ways that you can use or that you can contribute to a project. And if you think that it can be done in a better way, go ahead and do it. Yeah. So that's great. Yeah, keep doing that. What are, as far as return on investment, what do you think is what do you think provides the best return for somebody to automate something with Ansible? If you could only automate one thing, what do you think that would be?
Well, my knee-jerk reaction is automate everything, but it's kind of hard to pick one thing. Yeah. I would say the easiest thing to automate would be, like, you know, install these packages and configure these services, and that's that. The modules for that are really robust and really well thought out and really stable. And so, you know, if you need to, you know, install Apache and PHP and get your Apache virtual host configured, you know, it's very, very simple to do that. And so instead of you having to log into every box and do that, or, you know, say you need to make a change to, or add sites, or, you know, whatever you need to do, if you automate that piece, then the time it takes that you usually take to log into a server and do that configuration suddenly becomes, you know, seconds instead of, you know, minutes or hours. Yeah. And I think that you'd get a pretty good ROI on that.
Cool. There you go. All right, looks like we have another question from Vishnu, another follow-up there. In salt stack, we can call state.highstate on the minions to configure all the states. In Ansible, is there a way to call all the playbooks once at a time?
I don't know if there's a native way in Ansible to say, you know, run all these playbooks against all hosts. Typically, the way that you'd set up your Ansible playbooks is you'd have one called site.yaml, and that would configure what basically your entire infrastructure should look like, from your web nodes, database nodes, load balancers, whatever. And then that's the one that you use and you run to enforce that consistent state. So what you do is you wouldn't necessarily have to define multiple playbooks to get that one. One is you can have multiple plays with a collection of tasks in each one. So in the same playbook. And then you'd have other playbooks that do things like you update a application version. So like a common pattern is, feeding, this GitHub hash into this playbook will deploy that application out of GitHub onto my web servers.
Okay.
And like a rolling update, so you don't have downtime. So you can do things like, disable this node in the load balancer, roll out the new code, re-enable the node, move on to the next one, rinse and repeat through your entire infrastructure. And that's kind of how you would pattern that. If you really wanted to run them all, like if you had like a collection of playbooks and you had them organized like that, maybe like a bash for loop might be able to do that for you pretty easy.
Yeah. Yeah, you can do some of the looping, incorporate that in. You mentioned updating certain packages. I know that we've seen. It seems like the last 2 years have really been a lot about vulnerabilities, and a lot with OpenSSL, a lot with
and all the marketing around that.
Right. I think that's why it feels that way, right?
Yeah.
So you've always got some great name for your latest bug. I mean, I think they spend more time drawing the logo and everything than the building the patches. But yeah, so I've seen a lot of people not sweat it as much because they can use a tool like Ansible to. I mean, the nice thing is it's command line. So I mean, you can just from your command line just say, hey, update SSH on everything, update OpenSSL on everything. So
yeah,
you're finished.
I mean, that's true for any configuration management tool. If you have, I guess that's probably the better ROI than just configuring packages is being able to respond to security vulnerabilities like that, because whether it's Salt or Chef or Ansible, they all have information gathering pieces. So Chef has OHI, Ansible has facts, Salt has grains, and you can introspect a lot of information about the systems you have just using that information, and then make intelligent decisions based on that. So and part of that could be a playbook specifically crafted to check for the Heartbleed vulnerability or whatever it was. And then apply remediation if there is that vulnerability.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people. And Heartbleed, I think, was really the first one that had its own name, and or the first one that I remember. And I mean, it was so easy to just say, because you can create an inventory, right? These are all the servers that I have, and you can do that statically, right? So you can just say, hey, here's a file, and it has 17 different servers that I have. Or even just IP addresses, or you can actually use some tools to kind of make that dynamically. What are some of those tools that you would use at Rackspace to list out all of your servers? Yeah,
so you basically with the inventory system with Ansible, if it returns any script you run, really, if it returns, I think it's valid JSON in a certain format, then you can then use that script to query APIs and gather information. And so we have like internal tools at Rackspace that have a lot of inventory information in them, and then the actual native OpenStack APIs have information. And so you could potentially either use so there's actually a dynamic inventory script. I think it's racks.py that's included with Ansible Community. The setup is a little weird sometimes, but it's not terrible to figure out. And that will basically do just that. You provide it with some credentials, it reaches out over Pyrax and does an inventory of your infrastructure. And then it also does things like sets up groups automatically based on region or flavor type or whatever kind of niceties it gives you. And it throws that big JSON object right into Ansible, and then it can use that to actually target nodes or do inventory or gather facts or introspect your infrastructure.
Yeah. So here we go. So here's the host inventory section. And so I mean, basically you give it your Rackspace credentials, and you would do this across all of the clouds that you use if you have a polyglot cloud. But you would say, hey, here are my credentials, and then go find what I have, and then that becomes the inventory.
Yep, and then it returns something looking just like that, which is a giant JSON, which you don't see that unless you run the script manually by yourself. But if you set that as your target for your inventory, then you get all that great data back. And what's great is that as long as you can code and you can write something that returns JSON, you could do the same thing against an internal inventory system, or some kind of asset management tool that you have internally.
Right, and then you can tag things differently: development, production, staging, databases versus web nodes, whatever. Yeah, and the nice thing about this, having a dynamic inventory is the next big vulnerability comes out, because it will. and you go through and you say, hey, run the update against all of my machines that I have in my inventory. If that's a static file and you're out of date on one of them, that one's unprotected. But dynamic is going to go back and find every single one that you have, run it against all of them, and be done.
Absolutely,
be done. So always nice to have it like that. Always nice to have it like that. Great. So already talked quite a little bit about Ansible. Before we move on and talk about some of the other things that you've done that I think are pretty cool, just want to remember to welcome anybody that has joined us in the last little bit. We are doing a live Office Hours Hangout. If you have a question, you can ask us live. Drop a comment into the YouTube comments. Ask us on Google Plus or on Twitter, and then also the Crowdcast application has a question and answer area as well. More than happy. Had a couple of great questions from Vishnu. Anybody else that has them, let us know. So one of the things that I thought was neat is the way that you have automated your own blog and have set it up. This is the part where marketing at Rackspace gets a little bit upset. We have two Rackers talking about how to host a blog on without using any servers, right? but I think it's a great way to do it. I think there's a lot of benefit to having a static website and have a way to do it. And so you actually host your blog, and it's available completely stored on Rackspace Cloud Files, right?
Yep. So there is no server infrastructure at all behind my blog. I have a GitHub repository, and that's where all the articles and everything that I write live. They all exist in Markdown, which is like GitHub flavored Markdown. If you're familiar at all with GitHub, you kind of know what Markdown is. And then what I do is I use a static site generator called Pelican, which is similar to like Octopress, but it's Python, and I'm a Python fan. And so what we do there is basically I have some webhooks set up. So what happens is I have my repo locally on my laptop, and I make changes, and I commit those changes into Git, and then I push those up to GitHub. That triggers a webhook into CircleCI, which is a continuous integration system. And it, based on the configuration file in my repo, says, okay, run these commands. And those commands do primarily two things. They make the HTML for the site based on the Markdown files and all the static assets I have. It does all the CSS and JavaScript and all that fancy stuff. And then it takes that output directory and uses a tool called TurboLift, which Kevin Carter wrote. Is another great Racker, and it pushes all that up into a Cloud Files container on Rackspace Cloud. And then that container is made public and is set up as a static site. And so and then I have DNS entries that point, my domain to the CDN URL, which effectively gives you a statically hosted website. And as long as you can live with, a TTL on the CDN where you may have out of date content, as long as you can live with that, which I think the lowest you can set it, I think, is 15 minutes or 5 minutes or something like that. I mean, if I'm posting a blog entry, I don't care that it's not there for the first 5 or 10 or 15 minutes.
Right, exactly.
It's not a super high traffic site. It's not, anything super dynamic. And so that lets me do all that hosting and pay pennies for it, which is really cool. And it's also like I'm not having to maintain infrastructure, which that's been my goal, is like, hey, let's just service everything, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've actually kind of followed in the footsteps, and I had wanted to put up a blog. We run our own developer blog on the same principles, right? And I had kind of followed along, and it was nice because you had this tutorial that was available, and that was actually initially done with still Pelican, but you were using Jenkins, right? So to do that, and we actually talked a little bit about Jenkins last week, and that's a testing and an automation platform that kind of looks at a GitHub repository and says, have there been any changes? Okay, now let's bring it in. Let's run it through a series of tests. In your case, it was really just take the HTML or take the Pelican
generate the HTML and push it up.
And then you switch to a different version where you were using Drone. And Drone, in that instance, you were using Docker to to build a container that had a version of Pelican in it,
yep.
and do the same thing. And now you're using Circle CI, right?
Yep.
That's all it's all hosted elsewhere, and you don't have to worry about that at all.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I started out with Jenkins because we were doing some work related to that, and I was really more of an exercise to kind of. I was actually following along another Racker did something very similar, Hart Hoover,
Yep.
and so he was doing something similar with Octopress, and I was like, well, I don't like Ruby, so I'm going to use Pelican, but I guess I still got to use Jenkins because that's what all his examples were pointing at. So I'm like, okay, let's get into this, and then it ended up being this. I'm not a fan of Jenkins just because it's a lot to maintain and it's a big Java thing and. I guess the bigger point of why Jenkins is undesirable to me is that every time I had to go and like if I say if the server went down or if I lost the configuration or I was migrating it somewhere, I had to go and point and click and like set up all the jobs again and like all this point and clicking, and I don't like that. I don't like to spend half an hour trying to remember everything I had typed in before, and so that's big reason of what prompted me to move to Drone. Because Drone works a lot like Travis or Circle CI, in that you define your tests and your environment in a YAML file in your repo itself. So your actual testing becomes version controlled as well.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to worry about losing that.
Yeah. And let's actually take a real quick look at that. I mean, this is pretty cool. So we've just described everything that happens, right? So you write your code in a GitHub repository, right? So you can clone it locally and use your favorite editor, Vim, or whatever you want to use if you're in a graphical environment.
Notepad.
Yeah, Notepad, whatever you're using. So you can use it in any number of ways. But so you have that set up, and then you run it through Circle, right? And Circle does everything for you. So you're expecting probably a lot of lines of code to make that happen, but Circle has everything there. So I mean, all it is just a real quick file, 8 lines, to do it all, right?
And most of that is just like just kind of YAML overhead of like that kind of thing. It's we're telling what test to run here, which is make HTML. So whenever you generate Pelican, it has a quick start feature, and you basically commit a make file alongside the rest of your blog assets, and that make file has an HTML bit that basically just runs through all the directories and does what it needs to do to make the actual static content. And then after that, if tests pass, then it does the deploy step that we saw earlier in the Circle YAML file. And basically what that does is if tests pass on the master branch, then go ahead and push that up using TurboLift. And so you'll see some environmental variables there. And those are all set in the Circle web interface. So all those secrets or credentials are all set there. They're not stored in GitHub. Don't ever do that. That's horrible. Don't do that, please. And that's pretty straightforward. You actually had the requirements.txt pulled up a second ago too. So Circle does some really nice things. If it notices or it tries to do some introspection into your code to try to figure out what kind of environment you're running. And so if you feed it a requirements.txt, it will actually pip install all that stuff for you. So I don't have to worry about, so looking at moving from Drone to Circle, I don't have to maintain a drone image for Pelican. I can just let it fresh install it every time and just go from there.
Yeah. So so I have kind of stolen this from you, right? So I've been following you like one version behind.
Fork it.
Yeah, exactly. And so I've actually gone and I'm actually using where did we go? Oh, I've got it in a different branch there. So I'm actually using Hugo is the blog that I use. So I've got a slightly larger version of it because you can't pip install a Go program, right? So just but pretty easy to do that and just go ahead and run it. But at the end, it's the same thing, right? So it's upload it using TurboLift as well.
And are you using Circle?
Yes, Circle CI for this.
So Circle may have some introspection into Go apps.
Okay.
So you might be able to find a neat way to do that without having to write all that code.
Exactly, and knock it down from 25 lines down to slightly less than that. So yeah, but I mean the same thing, right? And so it goes through and it tells you, it just looks at your repository and says, has anything changed? Okay, build out some build out some this Go environment, build out Hugo, build the blog in Hugo, which is again just like Pelican or Jekyll or something like that. Just goes through and puts it all together, and it's done. But it's been interesting following right behind you, a couple of weeks behind you, and it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to keep watching Justin's blog and see when he makes the next change and see, because it's really been beneficial. But I think that running a static blog is something that a lot of, or not even necessarily a static blog, but a static website, because you can use Pelican or Hugo to build an entire website. It doesn't have to be a blog. It can be it can be an entire website. And I know that a lot of our customers that have like a marketplace, an online market store of some sort, I think they really benefit from having their main presence, almost a brochure. Hey, this is who we are and this is what we have, as a static HTML site. Because one of the big benefits is that it's virtually not going to fall down because of a bunch of traffic.
Yeah, it's backed by Akamai, which is they're going to stay up most likely.
They're absolutely going to stay up.
The typical pattern is to take all of your static assets, your pictures, your images. Those are the same thing. Your CSS, your JavaScript, and throw all that into like a Cloud Files container and publish it to the CDN, and kind of use that with like WordPress plugins that do that kind of stuff. Or I'm assuming Magento has stuff for that too. Yeah. But another pattern that I really like is if you do like a static brochure site like you're talking about, where hey, you may not be able to necessarily buy something right away, but you can see what the catalog is, look at the pictures, and read all the details about the products, all the reviews. If you had some kind of automated process that was scraping your site or pulling it all down or generating that HTML, and then throwing it into the CDN like we were just talking about, you can set a custom error page on your Cloud Load Balancer and 301 redirect whenever your main site happens to go down for whatever reason. You can 301 redirect to that Cloud static brochure site there, so that you're failing to a more limited functionality of your site, but you're somewhat up, right?
And that's something that everybody wants to build the bulletproof, never going to fall down stack until they see the price tag on that. Right?
Yeah.
You can build that. I mean, you can put your data in every data center. It's going to be slow because you have to bounce and be consistent across everything, and it's not the best idea. But if you have some graceful failover, or a limited failover of some sort, where I like this idea of scraping the brochure, just the introduction. You find yourself on the front page of Reddit. You find yourself on Shark Tank. If you're going to be on Shark Tank, call us first. We'll get you to the point where you don't have to worry about this.
Great team.
But if you do find yourself in some surprise scale, have that information on as a failover on a load balancer that just goes and is pulling it straight from the CDN. It is not. You have to have a load balancer first, of course, which we again recommend for just about everybody. But
no reason not to.
And the load balancers actually have a nice feature where you can put in just some HTML and you can inline the CSS with it. So you can use a generator to normalize that CSS into the HTML, but you can just drop in a chunk of HTML and it'll fail over as an automatic error message. Right?
Yeah, so right. And so you customize that error message into a 301 redirect, and then you're golden, at least for that. But I believe it's called the circuit breaker pattern, and it's really interesting because Netflix does this.
Okay.
And not directly like what I just talked about, but in a similar way. If you're looking at Netflix's app or main page or whatever, usually they'll have like, hey, these are recommended just for you, and these are the movies we think you'll like based on what we know about you.
Right.
But if you happen to hit an app server that may be overloaded or slightly degraded, then they may show you recommendations for like everybody, or like more generic things that have been cached as opposed to specific to you. So they actually do that like throughout their page, and you're not going to notice because the page doesn't change. And like you may slightly notice, or like, but it's not immediately obvious. It's not an error message. It's not a we're down, come back later. It's it's just a slightly different version of content that's been cached in a different way.
And that's a great way to think about caching as well, because it's like you have this dynamic site, especially something like Netflix, which is this is just for you. I can tell because of your history of watching movies, this is probably a good idea of what you want to watch. oh, that part is broken. No big deal. We're still going to show you things that a lot of people watch.
Yep.
That are popular just all over the place. So here's this little component that tells you, you know, some generic things, and that's a great way to think about ways that you can cache. I mean, obviously not just for a you know, if you're building the next streaming service, then, you know, there you go, there's your idea. But you know, anything else, you know, maybe you have a web page, maybe you have a part of your store that gives recommendations based on, you know, their past purchases or something like that. You know, maybe you go ahead and code that so it does that circuit breaker pattern and says, you know,
here's the most popular products across our entire site that gets updated every day, and it's cached somewhere. And
exactly, because it's cached, it doesn't have to be updated, you know, for each individual user or, you know, every 5 minutes or anything like that. So very good advice. Lots of very good advice. Cool. And then you can also, you know, I mean, just because you have a static site doesn't mean that you can't have dynamic aspects of it as well.
Right.
But we're talking about just like the front landing page or just an emergency failover page. I mean, you still build up the entire store itself, which obviously, you know, it's all dynamic, right? Because it's a shopping cart or whatever, but that you can be at store.whatever.com, you know, and just put it out there so that it's not, you know, you invest your infrastructure in the store, the thing that makes you the money, and then put the, you know, a more static.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So I think that's especially for somebody that's going to be on Shark Tank or something like that, where,
you may have a lot of like casual visitors who want to see
drive by, you know,
you know, put a nice big YouTube video right in the middle of your page to explain what it is, and if people actually want to buy it, then you click in even further, and then you start hitting the servers and the databases and all that stuff. Exactly,
because the last thing you want to do is have your site crash under the weight of Shark Tank tourists who are just going to, you know, go to every single website that they see on Shark Tank, either to watch it crash and burn because there are people like that, or because they're just curious. You know, you if you want your site to go down, you at least want to go down trying to help the people that are honestly going to buy your product.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do everything you can to kind of have something there. So again, check out Jekyll, check out Pelican, Hugo to create static web pages, entire websites even.
Yep.
So.
And it's cool that you can actually, even with those, you can build in some dynamic content from like Discuss does some commenting that basically it's just fancy JavaScript stuff that sits in your static content that you don't have to worry about, and it reaches out to Discuss to actually pull in comments from people and allow that functionality. And same for like Google Analytics and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. You can put in Google Analytics so you get that information. It's not like it's a lot of the same underlying technology that sites were built on, you know, 20 years ago, but now it's, you know, with the ability to get the analytics out of it and get a dynamic content put into it. You can, you know, embed a YouTube video or something like you mentioned earlier and put in some additional content. So that's nice to have. Yep. Well, great. This has been a great discussion. I've really enjoyed having you on there. It was probably something we should have done earlier, but we're glad we got it done now. So really glad to have you on. Is there anything else that you want to mention? I know that you're going to be speaking here in a little bit. You're going to be speaking at Linux Fest, right? Yeah,
Texas Linux Fest in San Marcos, Texas. That's going to be August 21st and 22nd. I'll be there on the 22nd on that Saturday. So they gave me the spot right after lunch. So I'll be putting everybody to sleep.
All right.
With service discovery with Console, which is a really cool service discovery / distributed key value store / templater / health checker kind of thing. And then, that's also SA DevOps. If you are in San Antonio, go search for on meetup.com, search for SA DevOps. It's run by Hart Hoover. I'm wearing the shirt today just for that. Well, you can't see it because he's sharing his screen.
Whoops.
But also happy birthday to Hart Hoover.
Exactly. Happy birthday, Hart.
Yep. There you go. SA DevOps.
There you go.
Represent.
So great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, cool. It was great to have you on. Really enjoyed chatting with you and get to share some of your secrets there. I'm definitely going to check out a little bit more about the circuit breaker pattern. That's a great thing a great tip. And then again, the thing that I think is going to stick with me the most is the whole idea of combining both configuration management and images, but really focusing on configuration management for the development and staging phase. But then once you're ready to go to production, go with images so that you can have a little bit more stability.
You know exactly what you're getting there.
Exactly, and that's really what you want in that production environment.
Yeah.
You don't want, like you mentioned, a new patch comes along and that changes everything. So you want to patch that as quickly as possible, but do that in your development staging and then push that to production.
Yeah.
So, yep. Great. Well, thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate it. We do this every week. We'll be back again next week with another one. And I guess we'll see everybody then. Take it easy.